quite an emotive topic. Player movement and the movement of players is always going to, be a topic we could probably discuss for ages and ages. But for me, the real big things that I want to try and get out of it is at least a bit of a framework that myself, Davide, and the rest of the team of Football Queensland can put work together, so that we've got a bit more of a discussion piece come the end of the year, and so that in 2021 we may have something a little bit more resolute to move forwards. Just on the presentation, if you sort of minimise the little boxes on the top right, it will help you see the presentation a little bit better. So this is what we're just going to look through today. I know some of it got sent out previously, but we're going to look at long-term agreements and have a good chat about them and what that means. And then we'll look at the player movements and trials and how that might look sort of moving forwards, and how it works with the long-term player agreements, or trials under the long-term player agreements. So as I mentioned, this is a real sort of conversation starter, and it's not the be all and end all, certainly, but I think we've got to have these difficult conversations to start building some changes. Really acknowledge, I'm going through the middle of it at the moment, and I'm sure you're sort of sick of it with us sort of pinching your players at the moment, that the TSP program is in exactly the same position. We absolutely concede that what we're talking about in here in terms of sort of trials and open trials, it affects us as well and what we're doing. And believe me, hand on heart, it won't be happening again this way. We'll be changing that for next year too. And then lastly, just to build some best practice for 2021 and beyond. So I'm not sure if anyone saw this article that was sent out. As I mentioned, worked with Nick very, very briefly at Watford before he went to Manchester United. And there was a really good article there just about how they're approaching sort of coming out from the COVID period there. Now, obviously, in the UK, they've had a little bit more of a harder time than us, and their academies are still closed probably for the remainder of the calendar year, and will open up next year. So it's a little bit different, but I think what we can all sort of take from that is that if Manchester United are looking after their players and not releasing anyone this year and taking that long-term approach, then I think if it's good enough for them, then it's certainly good enough for us in terms of where we are.
It would be nice to hear from the group who had the opportunity to read this article, and if you have any comments about it. I bet at least one of you should have read it, no?
If you didn't get a chance, maybe just have a look back. It's quite a good read. It just talks about what else they do in terms of their sort of person development, as well as the player, and they're really looking after that side of their program. So it's a good read, and I would really recommend you sort of read up on what Nick is doing there in terms of looking after the players. So long-term agreements, basically the big premise is that we look after players, and it's a club commitment to look after a player for more than 1 year. So it may be that you look after them for 4 years, from 9s to 12s, or at least the 2-year block. So it might be 9s to 10s, 10s to 12s, and even longer. So that's the basic premise. You could break it up to SAP, into that youth game training phase, and obviously the performance phase as well. And like I say, it's a club commitment only. So what I'd like us to have a chat about, and I don't know if you can work your sort of magic now, is we'll try and break up into a few groups. So if what we'll say is, David, I don't know if you can allocate a topic to a group, but one group will look after, so what can a club expect from a player in a long-term agreement? So if you're committing to a player, you're going to say, look, you don't have to trial for 4 years. What can you expect to ask that player in return? Topic 2, what can a player and parent expect from a long-term agreement? So if they're signing on the dotted line and committing to your club for 4 years, parent and player, what are they going to get apart from, obviously, the long-term commitment? And then the last one, which is quite important, what would make up a termination of agreement from both parties? So if topic 1 and topic 2 aren't met, how would that fall in terms of stepping away from that agreement? So David, I don't know if you can sort of break us up.
Yeah, I'll break up you in 3 groups, and then I'll jump on each group and tell you which is the topic. Yeah, so into 3 rooms, automatically 4 or 5, create breakout rooms. Okay, cool. 10 minutes for this discussion, and then we come back in.
Yeah, something like that. I think that's good. 5 to 10 minutes would be fine. Yeah.
Everyone happy with that? I might need to change the group slightly. Not all good. And here we go. John, you need to join. Yeah, everyone join, which is nice. Okay.
Could be interesting because I won't be at training all week. So,
hi guys. Sorry, yeah. You've got topic 1, yeah?
Okay.
Topic 1, okay. What can a club expect from a player in a long-term agreement? Yeah, got it? Well, I'll come back in a few minutes. I'll let you talk. So just to recap, what can a club expect from a player in a long-term agreement? We'll see you soon, guys. Tom, you here? Yeah, you can go in a room, I guess.
How do I do that, Matt? Just sort of been trying to find it. Do you know how I go? Because the little message hasn't come up.
Okay, if I move, you are already in breakout room 2 for some reason.
Okay, let me just see if I can. It might be because I'm sharing a screen. Hang on.
Yeah, try.
Oh, yeah, that's why. Okay, all right, no worries. Okay. Thank you.
If you go into 2, breakout room 2, mention that you are talking about what can a player parent expect from a club in a long-term agreement, and I'm going to break room 2, and I stay there for a while.
Don't need to.
Hello, guys.
Turn up or commit.
Davide.
You have topic number 3.
Yeah,
you know that, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. See, smart people do smart things. Excellent.
Players letting themselves go and not thinking they need to put the effort in, so drop off in performance.
Yeah.
An agreement would outline standards that were to be maintained and kept. So if they breach any of those standards more than once, that would be enough.
You're a hard man at the Eagles, Reedy.
What about like coaching changes or changes in fee structures and things like that?
So, Davide, is this just of what would how the club do, or is this of how a player could get out of it themselves?
Look, it would be what the club, but look, put it both ways. You know, it can be interpreted in both ways. To be honest, it's maybe what the club can think, or what would be the perception for the players to leave. You know, if something goes wrong from the club side, maybe. But yeah, the focus is how the club. Yeah, the reason why. Yeah, what would terminate? In both ways, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'd imagine the player or the parent, if you lose a coach and you can't replace them with one of the same license or the same license but one that isn't as good or whatever, I'd imagine that's grounds to some extent.
True, but you think that the club will act accordingly, and if they let go that coach, they might get somebody else even better in. I don't know.
Yeah,
That's my view. Hey, Mooney.
Hey guys,
Oh, welcome back, mate. How you doing?
I'm glad you put me in the same group as John Reed. Surely he's the only one that's here.
Thanks, Mooney.
Reedy's getting rid of everyone after one knockoff.
Well, if you have a long-term agreement, expectations on both parties should be met all the time. So there have to be performance reviews. In a long-term agreement, you have to have a performance review. And if expectations are not being met by the player for a couple of the reasons we've outlined, and they would be the reasons that the parents would have to understand the club would be terminating the agreement.
So, David, with the players that you give the free passes to, the players that we've got to build up from 13s to under 18s, are they're not expected to be able to leave? So if they get one of those contracts, they can't leave the next year?
Look, it's only a theory. We are here to hear from you what you think would work and what wouldn't work. So
like at the moment, we have to give a player in each age group a free, place each year.
Scholarship.
We have a scholarship program. So I'm not sure if you know about that, but I'm just saying, so with a scholarship player at the moment, we have an expectation if we sign them at 13 to take them through to 18. Yeah. So that's pretty much a long-term agreement.
Correct. And exactly right. So, and the point is, can we do that for all the players, or maybe for 75% of the players? I don't know. That's what we would like to do.
Yeah. The only thing I've got with long-term agreements is like the Manchester United thing's great, but they don't drop out of their academy tier. Where we drop out of our academy tier in a grading process.
Yeah, look, I hear what you're saying, Scott, but I think if you have some rules in place and they work for your clubs, the reason why there is this grading is not related to that long-term agreement. It's in relation to something else.
So for Daniel and Ron, who are Capalaba and Eagle, they're in the bottom tier at the moment. So they're in the development league. So are you saying to them they need to keep their players, because it's quite hard if they don't think their players are up to it, and the standard, because we've got 25 teams up in Queensland fighting to get in this top tier. I find it quite hard to do long-term agreements if you're in that bottom. Happy to
because players are attracted to go into better clubs. Yeah. And look, that's understandable. But we know there is no perfection for it, but it's just a way how to let's say be a little bit more patient with your players. Without denying the opportunity to go up if they're good enough. So it's that's my view of the things. And I know
so the long-term agreement would need like clauses in there where if they get identified by a higher league team or a state team or just whatever it is, then they're allowed to go.
Yeah, absolutely correct, Daniel. And in fact, Tom will mention later that we are thinking of potentially use something similar, where having clubs in different tiers. The top tier will have the let's say the possibility to talk to lower tier club and discuss the opportunity to approach players and this kind of stuff. But we want to, let's say, create a process, a procedure that everyone agrees on, and it's made by the clubs, and to facilitate this. Yeah, it's simple as that. But look, I'll let you to discuss in details what's coming out.
Well, I would imagine in the development league, we'd be looking to produce players for something higher, and that would be the Raw. If they have the opportunity within their long-term agreement to go and join the Raws program, then that would be something that we would endorse as part of their development.
Good point.
Yeah.
I mean, most of the boys in development would aspire to be playing in the academy league. We are trying to produce better footballers for our first team, and somewhere along the way, there's something else to aspire to in our program.
Guys, any comment on what John said? I agree. What are you?
Yeah, I think it has to be that's going to be one of the reasons that the agreement gets broken. If they get scouted by the Raw, we're not going to say no because we've agreed 2 years with you, so you can't go to the Raw. Yeah, I think it's normal.
So would you be happy for your players to go to, on a long-term agreement, leave your club and go to an academy club?
Honestly, probably depends on the academy club, because I think there's still a bit of a divide in that. Well, it's like a new league, isn't it? So there's going to be a divide for a while, I guess. But on a personal note, it probably depends on the club. But if the structure was determined properly, then yeah, I wouldn't have a problem with it.
What about you, Reedy?
No, I don't have a problem with it, Scotty, because if the opportunity is there for a player to better himself, then that would be in the club agreement as well. And if we determine that he would be better off to go into an academy league as in his interest, our first team are playing in the second tier. So we're trying to produce players from our catchment area. It's very difficult. There's a lot of clubs in our area.
Yeah.
So it's all watered down, really. But if we have an outstanding talent, we would encourage that talent to go as high as he could in the game.
Yeah, the only thing I'd like, because what we've struggled with in the last 2-3 years I've been here is we've lost, before we had NPL juniors, we've lost something like 25 to 30 kids to NPL clubs, which is fine, but we don't get any recognition for it.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I don't think that, like Simesy said, the parents couldn't care less. It would be something to talk about at dinner parties.
If a player and a parent wants to move, they're going to move.
Yeah, they'll move whenever they want. They don't care. They've done it to us this year. They'll do it next year. They'll do it the year after. So same for you guys too, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think so. The only possibility, and I don't think that's possible, is that Football Queensland assist from their side from a legal perspective, but I don't think that can be done. So saying a player is going to sign for a club, now if he wants to move, he goes to Football Queensland and they are going to deny the transfer because that player is signed 4 years with a club. So that is the first step, but the player can say, I'm unhappy, I'm not happy here, I want to move. Obviously, he's going to move. So you cannot stop a player a kid to move from one club to another. That's my opinion.
If he says it naturally, he may not say it. You may just get an email, we're off, see ya. So,
yeah, but in that case, if that's what I say. So Football Queensland in that case can say, no, you cannot move. Okay, yeah. You can leave the club, but you cannot register with another club in the NPL. You know what I mean? Because that is something with the coaches can be the same thing. So if a coach is registered with a club, in a window or whatever, they cannot move. The players the same thing. So if the agreement is 4 years and that agreement is with Football Queensland and they have it, they could stop a player to move from one club to another, unless there is a good reason. And I think giving a good reason is very easy for the families.
We had a classic last week of a player that came to our club from another NPL club, and he wasn't selected to attend the TSPs. He wasn't selected, so just he'll be leaving the club at the end of the season. So that, you know, he's got a good coach, he's got a good environment, and he's got a lot of good. Probably look to through this process for just say 2 years, but they've made a decision just because they didn't get in the TSP trials that you know, he thought his opportunities lie elsewhere. So, you know, we would, you know, my main key for our club is to make sure we employ the best coaches as design. But it's going to be different on one way. What could the player offer the club, right? Then you come back to the loyalty factor, and I honestly deep down think it's a good concept, but I think the parents and the player, I think they'll make the decisions. Not be negative, but it's a fact of life.
Well, while we're still charging, they have all the control. If it was free, we'd have the control, but. Nice positive chat, everyone. This is going to go down well in the group.
Is that
we had the same one with us, Simon, as well.
Pardon?
We had the same ones with us, TSP selections and nominations and parents kicking up. Yeah. Very, very difficult to manage that.
For sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, that is another thing we can discuss when you want, but honestly, the best trials are every Saturday and Sunday in the games, and the coaches from Football Queensland should be coming to the games and scout players and make their own decisions. And yeah, that is the responsibility. I had this chat with Tom, and that would be the best way to do it. We are in a very difficult position, saying this player is going, this player isn't going, and they blame us.
Yeah, totally agree. The issue is, though, they have to actually get out and do it. It's a lot of work for them. Whether they're able.
No. I really think it isn't. In comparison with what they are doing right now, they have all the Tuesdays and Thursdays, hundreds of kicks there at Meeking. So if you go to one venue, you are watching all the teams in all the age groups. Both teams, and in 3 weekends you have watched all the NPL. I don't think it's that hard. I think it's much easier that way.
But sorry, I feel I have to jump in on this. But Nacho, don't you think that you are the best people as a TD and coaches that are with those players for the whole year to indicate the players that are good or not? Or do you rely
at the end of the day
on us? Sorry, or do you rely maybe on us that have watched, I don't know, one game or maximum 2 games of that player who maybe overperformed or didn't perform? You know, I think you are working closely with them. You know your players better than we do.
Well, that's why we are in direct communication. But the final decision is Football Queensland responsibility. That is how it should be. Because if not, we are taking a responsibility that honestly it's not ours. So we can work with Football Queensland, have phone calls, but the final decision, it doesn't work that way. Even more when we are making decisions after 2 months with the players, some of them. So
Yeah,
we
but I
have
don't
watched
see
them.
this. Look, we might go off topic here, but I don't see this as a responsibility. I see this as a, you know, you're providing your players an alternative option of playing football, right? So
Yeah, but we are saying this player yes, this player no. So that is something that we are making. At the end of the day, they come to us and they say, why my player is not going to the TSP? And you have to, in the middle of the season, like it's like a retention or releasing conversation, because the player feels that he's not ready. I think that is a problem that we are facing in other clubs. And I think it could be managed in a different manner, because if the decision comes from Football Queensland, they're going to say nothing. They're not going to go to you and say, hey, because they understand that it's a different source, but they are not blaming the coach, the club directly, because they take it very personally. It's very dedicated.
look, we can chat about this in another occasion, but yeah. Okay. You happy to?
I'm happy to do it.
Yeah. Look, are you happy to provide a quick feedback to the whole group when we go back? We'll break out in a minute or so. Okay. We'll see you in the big room, guys. Cool. Everyone should be here by now. Am I right? Yeah. Cool. Off you go, Tom.
Yeah, one sec. Yeah, so thanks for that. So what we'll do is we'll probably get a bit of feedback now. I've got some notes, and from each group we'll just make some bullet points as we go. So from our group, I might have to change this slightly. Can anyone sort of summarise what we spoke about? I've got some notes written down if we need to. 1 second. Sorry, 1 second. I just want to be able to make some notes. Yeah, great. So from group one, I don't know, Matt, do you want to bring up a couple of points we spoke about? Matt Pooley?
Yeah. So basically, what you can expect, what players can expect from the club is just a consistent development philosophy for the term of their agreement, really. Who knows what you can offer on top? And as I said, I'm a bit skeptical of offering different things to those type of players as opposed to everyone else. I'm not sure what can be offered on top of what you do, apart from a commitment that your standards will be maintained through that period. Probably also talked about the what happens with the players who aren't offered these, and how is that managed within the player and the parent group. That was, I brought up as a concern. I'm sure I can see that happening as well, and how that's dealt with. Because of course you don't want to lose. You don't want players moving on because they don't get what they want, and all of a sudden you've got to find players anyway off the back of it. So that's a little bit of a concern as well. So I think it's just a commitment, really, that you'll maintain your standards as a club, and obviously on top of the commitment to the player that he'll be here long term.
Thanks, mate. Just making some notes here. Places secured long term. Other bits we spoke about was making sure that players have a clear sort of individual plan for their learning, so that they don't fall into a comfort zone. Obviously, if you've got them locked away for 4 years, in year one, have they got a cigar on, thinking that they don't need to try hard in training and games because they know they're going to be there. So a clear individual learning plan, really important. Okay, I'll go back and make some more notes and share these with everyone after as well. So group number 2, we spoke about, I've done it the wrong way around. Hang on. So the club expectations. So what can the club expect from the long-term agreements? Anyone from group 1? I think it's David A's group.
Yeah, I'll speak. Basically, we said the club can't expect too much. We're hoping that there's a little bit more commitment from the player and the parent in regards to sort of, staying at the club and not looking to trial elsewhere. However, we all sort of agreed that we feel we can't control that, and ultimately the parents have the power and will do what they want to do whenever they want.
Look, I expect loyalty from the players.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is, if you're committing for 4 years and suddenly, in year 2, you find them trialling down the road without, telling you, do you think that's fair? What do you reckon, Ted?
No, we agreed that we'd expect some more loyalty, but we were just being very much sort of realist in the fact that ultimately, like, the parents will, we didn't even say the player, the parents will make the decision on whether they want to go or whether they want to stay.
Tom, just for your information, last year I had 1 year agreement with all the families. Okay, just a letter saying we are offering this position to you 1 year. If you don't want to take it, that's good. Fair enough. The moment you sign this agreement, we expect you to stay the whole season. 4 players signed that agreement and then left, 1 month after, and they said, no, we have changed our mind. So, I mean, if they want to do it, they're going to do it. How many didn't leave or didn't go to other clubs because they had that agreement? I don't know. So I expected also the same loyalty, but at the end of the day, those who want to leave, what we discussed during the discussion was that they will eventually leave.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So just remember that this is always on the club side of the commitment. Like you say, at any point, you can't contract under 18s financially or anything like that. But all it is a club agreement that they won't need to trial to maintain their position. So from a value proposition, if a player and a parent is weighing it up and they know their position's safe for 4 years at one club or 2 years, but they go down the road and trial, it's a little bit stick and twist. If they trial down the road and don't get in but don't let you know, then obviously do they give up their position? What else from a club point of view? If you're investing your time for 4 years, you're giving up the opportunity to fill that player's spot with a new player coming into town, what else would you kind of ask that player do? Can they play school football? Can they, can they play rugby? Can they play cricket? Do they have to tell you what they do? What do you think?
I think the players would have to. If you're going to commit to them like that, then they've got to obviously disclose everything they're doing, because you're taking a big punt on them as a club, and obviously, you know, you're heavily invested in it. So I think it's got to be full disclosure about it for sure.
Do you think that makes a difference if they have long agreement or not? I mean, everybody should do that. Everybody should be, well, telling us what they are doing, controlling and monitoring the workload. And if they cannot play school football, it doesn't matter. And having said that, I don't think that's possible to ban school football.
No, not necessarily ban, but I think certainly notification, or at least saying, you know, because the other thing as well is what about, you know, holidays during the season, or what about, you know, missing games for band practice or sisters' birthday parties. And I'm sure we've all heard like excuses, like not excuses, but reasons like that. You know, remember, we're up in the ante here. We're saying that we're committing for a longer period of time. Do we think we've got a right to go the other way and sort of ask back the, you know, in terms of loyalty and commitment, that side?
Tommy, I've got a question.
It's also
sorry, sort of on this topic with the scholarship players. So with a player that's on a scholarship, what's the intention from Football Queensland with those players? Obviously, to keep them at your club from 13 to 18 is part of the agreement. But what if another club tries to sign one of your scholarship players? Is there something that can happen with that from Football Queensland, where if a club tries to sign a scholarship player, you know, that club gets reimbursed from the club they go to because you've invested in them and, you know, waived their fees for a couple of seasons?
100%, Scotty, and I think that's what will form our conversation later in the presentation, is about how this all fits together with trials and player movement. Because if we can lock down more players within long-term agreements of clubs, we're going to try and reduce the amount of mass movement of players. We're never going to stop players moving, but what long-term agreements do is solidify and gravitate clubs to players for longer periods of time. In terms of consequences and a way to approach players and things like that, we've got a few points and ideas later that we can discuss about that and how we can have a bit of a better working relationship in terms of player movement, talent ID, and things like that. So maybe just hold fire on that sort of question. We'll come back and circle back. One thing that just wanted to.
Yeah, I have a comment on experience in Italy. Basically, what happens there, you know, you sign a contract with your club at the age of 6 when you start, and it goes year by year, I think, or max it's 2 years until the age of 12, something like that. But then at 12, you have to make a decision if you want to stay with a club or move. And once you sign, basically the contract is for the whole youth period. So it's for about 5 or 6 years. And if you decide to leave, you need to communicate to the club. And then there should be an agreement in between the two clubs, the new one that you're going to go and your former clubs, before you are allowed to move. So obviously it's a quite strict rule, but it might be something that we consider, you know.
Yeah.
And in the end, it's this long-term agreement potentially.
There is a big difference, I think, with here, and it's like Taz said. So how much do they pay in Italy? The parents, I mean, because here they pay so much that it's like a service, you know, in some regards, and I think it's much harder to say a player, no, you cannot move from one club to another because they are paying so much money, you know.
No, I understand, but at least, you know, the courtesy of finding an agreement with the new club, that would be something that we could potentially put in place. Well, that's my opinion, though. But you know, I'll let you go.
I think further to that point, actually, I think when we look at, you know, parents are paying a fee and what in terms of the service offering that we're providing them outside of the football delivery, if every August and September time in a normal season, the kids, young boys, are suddenly treading on eggshells in all of their walk of life because their position at their club might be in doubt, and you times that by 60, 70% of your club, and then we times that by all the clubs we have, just think about how many sort of players are going through the anxiety and the inefficiencies of trials that we can sort of move away from. So when we talk about like the service offering that we're providing to customers, I think certainly that comes into it as well. Just bearing in mind we've got quite a bit to get through. Last point I just wanted to make on here is when I mentioned school football, it wasn't a case of stepping aside from school football, not doing it, but certainly notifying. And as you said, Nacho, it should be happening anyway. But I think when we up the ante of club commitment, can certainly expect it to be fairly rigid. And then, we may have some consequence for players. It's very easy at the moment that players and parents are paying a fee and we offer a service delivery. Well, this gives us a little bit of ammunition back to say, well, hang on a minute, we've offered you 4 years, 2 years, and you've got only a little bit, but you've got something to hold back against them as well. So just remember that as well. It gives you a little bit in your back pocket of ammunition to sort of go back. Last group. So on both ends, we've probably covered a lot of these so people can dive in. What would make up a termination from both parties, and how is it different for a long-term agreement and not in just a normal sort of setup? If anyone from that group can have a go.
Yeah, we just talked about meeting expectations in performance reviews being a big one, because you're going to have a heap of performance reviews if you're talking about a 2, 3, 4 year agreement. Dropping performance or standards in general. Attendance, like you were saying about like getting comfy and missing things for a birthday or whatever it may be. Training attendance has got to be one of the best, if not the best, if you're giving these kind of commitments to players. Changing players' circumstances, whether that's social circumstances, like whatever it may be, that's always gonna change things. Changing club circumstances, maybe, like if a COVID things happen, like another thing like that in the future. Behavioural issues on and off the pitch would be one. And the other one is if there's got to be probably a clause in there where if they get scouted by higher level clubs or the Raw or whoever, that you've got to let them go and try and achieve that. They're the main things we talked about.
Yeah,
what about
good,
players moving up as well? I heard that in those conversations.
Yeah. So whether they're moving from MPL development to MPL Academy or either into the Raw, either or, but there's got to be something in there. So, because if we have them at Capalaba in an MPL development league, and we're going to say we've got you for 4 years, and then all of a sudden, second year, third year, they should be in an MPL Academy team or they should be in the Raw team. We can't hold them back from that. So, there needs to be something in there about that.
Yeah, that's really good. I think just from experience as well, that one there about the release and the compensation fee, I think it goes without saying that, obviously if a player's moving on to, things like the Raw in Australia, but the other big one as well is if a European team comes in for a player, then the club is due solidarity payments, which is set by FIFA. Now, that can be a hurdle in terms of that player moving, because if it's player little Johnny gets attracted to Man U, and Man U turn around and say, well, we're not paying that 30-40 grand, and then that might block that player's dream of movement of moving on. You can still keep the 10% sell on, so I think that's really important just to consider as well. Anyone got any other points just to wrap that up? So club, player, and termination. Okay, we'll whiz on. So there's some really good points here. I'll tidy them up and get us some notes back to everyone as well. Just want to move on now to sort of tidying that all together in terms of what it might look like from, trials. So this is what this is all about, is to try and navigate away from the mass movement of players and to try and reduce, workload and all the mess that trials can bring with it. And there's a little bit of sort of change in language there as well in there in communication, how you sort of frame sort of retrials and extended training. So if you just minimize those boxes, you might be able to see all of that timeline. So very quickly, so this is a sort of traditional sort of long-term agreement. So if we were just doing year on year, you've got the end of the season around September. For us in COVID year, it's going to be sort of November. Traditionally, that's when we give players decisions and we get a yes, a no, or a retrial. We then enter the retrial period in October, December, and you enter a real period of uncertainty for lots and lots of players. Then in the off season, so November, December, when we should all be on the beach, chilling out, we're rushing around. Has this player paid a deposit? All the ones that you've said no thanks to, they might be gone, and then a player that you've offered a spot may leave, and then you're chasing and trying to claw back the ones that you've said no to. So it can be a real nightmare sort of period. So if we look at into a little bit more detail in terms of how we manage numbers, and I appreciate that this isn't a snapshot of every club, and I'm sure we've all got our individual differences, but just in general terms, from non-long-term agreement to long-term agreement. So if we take one age group in the 13s to 16s, we'd hope to have a good sort of retention rate. So if we've got 12 that are green, that are yes, we've got 6, that last player that may be losing, maybe moving out of the area, and then we've got 3 there that we're going to enter into a retrial. So all these have got a great feeling, they're done. The yellows are sitting on the fence and the red is moving on, maybe their decision or not. We then take our players and we stick them into the mix of a trial period of, however many players you've got. It might be that through emails and getting on the phone, you can knock these down and sort of break these numbers down. But the new player, these existing players enter with the mix of new trialists. Because there's no planning, the open trial system is the only way to sort of fill those gaps that are leaving. So just want you to think about sort of numbers as well. So if you've got your core group, you've got this retrial lot, and you're entering week 1, 2, 3, 4 of trials, how does that look? So suddenly you've gone from 20 players. What do you do with the players that you've retained? Do they join in so you can compare like with like? And also have a think about how those retrialists feel. So you've seen them all year. They played 10 months of the year. And then you're saying with the wording, the language that's used, that you've got a trial again. Surely it should be that the blue players are on trial and that the yellows and reds don't have to trial. You've seen what they can do over the year. So let's flip it on the head and have a look at what would happen if we had at least 80% of retention within long-term agreements. So just let you have a look at that. So if that's our 13s to 16s, and here we've only gone with 2-year agreements. So the dark green, they've been retained because they've got their, the light green have been retained because they've got another year to go. The dark green are in their final year. So this is just an example snapshot. The pinks might be offered another long term when it comes to the end of the season. The reds might be just leaving the club from natural attrition, and the yellows have got what I think is a better way of terming it, a delayed decision. Okay, so just think about that, a delayed decision. Rather than a retrial, their decision is delayed. So just in terms of numbers, as you're going through the season now, because you've only going to have, at the maximum sort of 15 or 20 that you need to replace as such, it may be that with age group coaches, you can say, right, your job is to retain 80%, but throughout the season, I want you to talent ID 5 to players don't feel like they're retrialing, they're just extending the training. So this is a really important one. So when you enter that trial period, instead of having, them hundreds of bodies, because you've only got the low numbers, you can still train with your groups. So your age groups carry on for an extra month. The players that are coming in on trial, they just join in with who you've got in your age group. I'll let you read those little boxes there. So the players that you are saying have to go through this delayed decision, because you haven't made a decision, you can't have, you've got to say that you want to let them go and try elsewhere.
Tom, can I make a comment on that? Like, we obviously, it's a tough situation, but like, we obviously have this situation at East with the players that we asked to retrial. It's not like we just say you have to retrial and that's it. For us, there's always, in any 50-50, they're going to be picked.
Mm-hmm.
And we very much emphasize the fact that we want them to, get selected.
Mm-hmm.
Top of that as well. So like, it's not just, there's no feedback given. Like most players that we pick to retrial are going to be for the fact that we want to see a little bit more from them. We want to see a little bit more, I don't know, a little bit more seriousness or effort or something along those lines that we think's missing. So
just on that, Taz, do you think that, you've seen him for the season, do you think that you're going to see anything new in that sort of next period that you hadn't seen for that year?
I think it's double-edged sword, because we do. Like, there's a player in my mind when you say that. We've one player we picked, we saw a lot more in the trials, but now that player had a little peak and he's gone back down to his level. So it's hard to judge, but then flip side of that, there's other players that trial and they kick on. We had one player in our 16s trial, tough decision, got selected, and now is arguably one of the best players. So it just depends. It's hard. There's no, it's hard to tell.
Cool. Yeah, I think you make a good point there that as long as there's parent and player communication when you're making these choices, I think it's really important. I just think that, like you say, that the language that you use during that time is really important, isn't it? If you go into a trial period, call it what you want, a trial period, and you say, look, for a new player to come in and take your spot, they need to be head and shoulders above what you are. And you're not, what I'd say is, you're not necessarily on trial. We want to see more from you, but the pressure is on the other player. All the new players that are coming in, the pressure's on them, it's not on you. So that's kind of the framing of that delayed decision and the changing of that language of a retrial period. And no, it's a really good point, because, like you say, how often do we get that that chance to have that little bit of fear in them as well, in terms of their position. So sometimes a little bit of adversity in there, it can develop them psychologically as well. Rather than giving them like an easy road from 13s, 14s, 15s, 16s, sometimes the ones that are, that 12th, 13th player in the under 14s, to go through a little bit of fear there, that might kick them on a little bit. So, no, you make some really good points here, Taz. So just generally, like, this is an extreme, obviously, but this is what we're trying to do. That's one age group of trials, open trials, and this is a whole club. If we've got long-term agreements where that 17th, 18th, 19th player may be able to drop in during the season as well. Okay, guys, so that was just a bit of a snapshot. We'll send you this in a PDF so you can have a look in more detail and go from there. So that was trials with non-long-term agreement and long-term agreement. Bit of a different topic. So just from us, and I know, Taz, we spoke about this before, about 7 days and things like that.
Tom, before you go ahead, one question about what we just discussed. So, for example, if so the players that would be on trials with the club could be players normally in yellow and in red from other clubs. Is that right? What players are we expecting to come to us to trial for a new position?
So what I'd say to that, good point, and sorry I didn't open it up to questions, is so if you've got long-term agreements and you give your age group coaches the task of having a high retention and also identifying 3 or 4 players across the season. Now that could be anywhere. It could be school, it could be other clubs, it could be any walk of life. But that's all they need to do. They need to find 4 or 5 players, not mass open trials.
It's not open trials, okay.
No, yeah, that's it. So when it comes to the end of the season, those players that you've identified, you then contact, appropriate communication, not to players and parents, but to clubs, and we'll talk about that in a second, so that when you continue your training after the season with your core body of players, you haven't got 38 to look at, you've got 5 to look at in comparison to your retrial 5. Because the long-term agreement allows you to take the pressure off finding this many and have better quality looking in at this many players.
Makes sense. Mm.
Any other questions? So that tied it up quite nicely about, okay, so we've identified the 17, 18, 19 blue players. How do we then go about, making contact and getting them into our club?
So Tom, wouldn't that be, if everybody had a long-term contract with their players, wouldn't everybody just get the players that other clubs are releasing?
Possibly, and it may be outside of
because there's always a reason you're releasing a player. It's not, there's always issues there, or for it's very rare that a player leaves if they're happy with the current where they currently are. It's pretty rare that they leave unless you want them to leave. Yeah,
and I think, Paul, it's a really good point. We discussed it briefly in our little mini group, was with that 16th player there, if that's your rank of players, 1 to 16, 1 being brilliant and probably knocking on the raw radar, all the way down to 16, you've got to ask yourself, what do you want from that 16th player? If he's a good kid, a good parent, and he turns up, he doesn't break your sessions down, his behaviour's all right, is he really does it really need to be released? I think we've got to have a consideration about that and how quickly we turn over players and move them on. One thing it might be, Paul, is that with that 16th player, if you for whatever reason, if he's not right and those things I just mentioned don't work out, and you've got this 17th, 18th, 19th player from another club, it may be that you, in your communication from club to club, you can say, look, we want to look at player 17, we're getting rid of player 16, can you house them in your trials or have a look, what do you think? Now, look, that's in an ideal world, but we've got to aspire to these things, I think, certainly. But no, it's a really good point. So just on that, in terms of how we sort of communicate, I think, having a better working environment for all of us is great. In an ideal world, if we had long-term player agreements and we followed something called the 7-day approach, I think we would be not far off, where we can get. There's always going to be, shortfalls and players are going to move and there's going to be rogue coaches and TDs and things like that. But, if we can adhere to what we can, I think that'd be great. So the 7-day approach, I'm sure Taz can jump in a bit. It comes from in the UK and it's more based off of senior players. So let's just differentiate what that is at the moment. So this is for senior players that are non-professional. So this is from the UK. So there's some text from the English FA. The yellow is obviously the most sort of important part. Okay, so basically the notion is that any player that's not contracted to a higher professional contract, what would happen? A new club would make contact to the club. So all this is about is having a professional working environment so that clubs communicate and there isn't club to player communication. So a club would contact a parent club, in writing. 7 days later, the new club can then talk to the player. Within that time, the parent club has 7 days to talk to the player without any contact from the new club. And at the end of that period, the player must give notification on decision to go to the new club or stay at the parent club. And then there's other things about compensations and releases. And then you can mutually agree how long the trials last. Remember, this is just for seniors at the moment. Where for juniors is, like say, Paul, we've got all the clubs locked in long-term agreements. We don't really want any movement, during the season. There shouldn't be any need for that. In an ideal world, if we've got clubs that are locked into long-term agreements with players and we're only looking for that 4 or 5, and the clubs have ID'd a player, they've looked at them, they've seen them play. If they make an appropriate approach to their parent club and say, look, we've seen so-and-so play for his under-16s at school, he's registered to you, can we talk to him about coming into our extended trials at the end of, extended training at the end of the season? And then it's for that club, to sit down and talk to your own player and say, this is what we can do for you. This is what it can look like. And I'm not talking financial, but it might be, an opportunity. I think that's what the painful thing is when, a player says, oh, I'm going to club X, and they've gone and they've signed and they've done. You just feel frustrated that you didn't have a chance to talk to the parent and player and say, okay, explain your concerns at this club. What are we not providing that this other club is? And I think that 7-day window affords the clubs the opportunity to do that. So in summary, 7-day approach. NPL junior clubs should have full squads going into the off-season period anyway. There should be no need to recruit during the season. And it can happen across any football landscape. And this again is to avoid mass movement of players and sideways movement. So what we don't want to have, and we'll talk about it in a second, is too much sideways movement of clubs at certain levels as well. Has anyone got any questions about the 7-day approach before we look at how it can be applied? Either seniors or juniors. Anyone, that concept, from a senior end, let's put our senior hats back on. Do you think that is doable and something that we could all conform to?
I think something you have to consider, Tom, is it's not always the clubs, it's sometimes the players playing the clubs off.
Say that again, Sarah, sorry.
It's sometimes the players playing the clubs off between one another. So I think that's where you've got to try and also come in and around it. Sometimes it's not the club approaching a player, it's a player saying they want to come to the club and not actually disclosing always the facts that they're still already linked to another club. And we've already had that in the junior sides. Yeah,
I think it's a great point, and probably this approach would formalise that a little bit more as well, because if there is that, a parent comes in and says, this club is sort of wants us to go there. Well, if you haven't had a 7-day approach or a written letter, you kind of know that that's not necessarily truthful or not. And for senior players, if they're playing the game because they want an extra $50 a week, well, if they're not following this approach, again, it doesn't hold as much value because it's not an official contact.
I don't know about the 7-day approach in the juniors, and the reason why I say that is only less than 3 weeks ago, East lost a player. They came to us. They spoke to us. We spoke between Taz and myself, along with the players in question. We've actually managed to give them a player that's now gone up to the next level because they're now in academy instead of development. And they've also managed to give us a player that we can develop. And that happened in less than probably 4 days. But it's been a benefit for both clubs. So sometimes the in writing doesn't always work because teams could be without a player for a period of time that could hinder their whole squads. In that instance, yeah, it was fair on both sides. It worked for both sets of players, and everyone's happy. It's not always going to be that perfect. I get that.
Yeah, look, again, I think that's a fair point. It doesn't always have to be that formal, does it? But I think having an official period of time, this is like the worst case. This is like in writing, it's a maximum of 7 days. If it can be done before, it's like when you're releasing a player on the sports TG. If you don't release them, they're done automatically in the 7 days anyway. But yeah, it's just formalising that process as well, and credit to yourself if you're doing it already. It doesn't have to be that formal. Anyone else? Taz, I know this was sort of something we've had a chat about previously, and anyone experienced it overseas even?
The only thing I'll add, Tom, on it is I think obviously that's going to be a little bit of trial and error at the start if we do go with this, but I think if we do decide it's for the best, it has to be, there has to be consequences for not following this approach. I think that's the key. That's the only thing I want to add. Yeah, no, we'll come to that in a second. It's a really good point, and I think consequences is important, and it needs to be there. Otherwise, there's no sort of value in what we do. But I think that needs to be driven by us. What we need to come up with those consequences. I don't think it should be prescribed by Football Queensland or any club. It's for us as an industry of peers to come up with those consequences. But we'll come on to that later. And yeah, Sarah's last point about the juniors. Obviously, the juniors ideally would be more in that trial period. Once the season ends, that's when we'd like to see that communication more formalised, rather than it's just a free for all, and there's thousands of kids on the move as well. So look, this is again just a model that is for discussion. This is just something I've had a conversation with a few of you about the movement and how it could look in terms of what the clubs need to do to be able to do a 7-day approach, and how does that communication filter down. So it may be, do we really want sideways movement of our tiering in our players? I would suggest not, and when I say tiering, these boxes could be filled with different tiering, however it looks. It might be community NPL, it might just be 2 blocks, it might be raw community football, grassroots, so don't get too hung up on what the boxes actually say, but I think certainly we've got to be mindful of trying to avoid, we spoke about mass movement of players, but then sideways movement of players I think is if we can avoid that's important too. So it may be that in juniors what we're looking at is a 7-day approach communication club to club, and talent ID'd from areas below. Areas below, we don't want necessarily to see one, the community get absolutely destroyed. But what I'd then say is these community clubs may be the ones that do have the open trials. As I mentioned before, we're not going to stop the mass movement of players, but the community area, that might be one that they need to do that. That's fine. And release players. Look, if an academy club takes a player from a development club, but there's a release player going the other way, exactly how Sarah just mentioned there, from south to east, and there's that circular movement. I think that's a brilliant way of sort of how to administer the 7-day approach. Does that all make sense? That idea? Has anyone got any comments on that or fears from that? Because it can be quite a fearful sort of thing thinking about that. And obviously the A-League would sit up here probably.
There wouldn't be that possibility. That for me, that's key also. Is that true? Is that right?
Yeah, just in this model, yeah, what we'd say is the clubs within here, if they've all got long-term agreements and 80% of the players are locked up anyway, unless, like a family is moving from, the Sunshine Coast to the Gold Coast, and there's a natural movement of families, then where possible, we want to settle the movement of players,
Yeah, but so let's say a club from the academy box wouldn't be allowed to approach a player from, even with the 7-day rule, from the same box, from the academy. They wouldn't be allowed. Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah. And look, if we're building up our communication from club to club, and I know, like I say, it's an emotive topic and things like that, but if we've got a player here that's moving, you know, from the other side of the city, it may be that this club picks up the phone to this club and says, look, we've got a moving player, can you pick him up? And I think you'll find the more you help out clubs around you, the more likely it is to come back the other way.
Tom, the other thing you need to think about too is some players move when they still owe clubs money. So that still needs to be identified as well, which I thank Logan massively, because a player from our club went to theirs to try and get in their squad, and we wouldn't release him because he wasn't financial with our club, and they backed us with that decision 110%. So I think that's also something that needs to be thought about in that process.
I think that's a brilliant point. I just made a note of that because, you know, we mentioned the formality of the 7-day approach or not, but even if that became habit, look, even if you were really good mates with someone down the road and you know, a player turned up, even then by checking, you know, picking up the phone or in writing saying, look, this player's turned up, things like that can be ticked off, can't they? Like if they're financial or not. Or even, you know, it might be that, you know, we've all dealt with them, the parents are an absolute nightmare, don't go near them, you know, they're not a low maintenance player, they're a real high maintenance family, I wouldn't sign them, you know, things like that as well. So that's a really good point. Is there anything else like that would be a benefit of this approach, can anyone think?
Just from the side, Tom, and another one. Sorry, everyone, I will sharp in a minute. But I'm just thinking possibly like we could have some kind of shadow system. I think it would be hard to get clubs to agree, but it'd be great if, you know, development clubs were speaking to academy clubs going, you know, look, we've got 2 really good players. You know, could they possibly come and join the academy sessions as an extra training? Or vice versa, it could be the academy club with shadow players that they've signed and then saying, look, we'd like them to play at development level, and all the way up to the gold ring fenced even, you know, but some kind of cross pooling where, you know, players that are doing really well in the development get to play at academy, same with academy to gold, you know, and have a more sort of in-house trial process where they're that shadow position, aiming to then go naturally into the full squad position. That, you know, similar to what we do in SAP with our Komodo kids, having the shadow players in SAP and aiming to train those Komodo kids up to get the full squad positions.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. But if I was a TD, I was a development, you know, club, and I had that relationship in place with an academy club, and I moved a player on, I'd be saying, you know, what tangible things am I going to get back? And at the moment in our club development that we're going through at the moment, one of the scores that goes down is player outcomes. And what we have within there is producing players for state teams, national teams, professional clubs. But why could we not have another area of that where we're saying if we're producing players that move up this pathway, that we're rewarded for that as well? Because it may be that this development club, you know, might be absolutely fantastic at developing players that move up to academy, or always losing players to academy and gold ring fenced, but are not necessarily rewarded, and may only be rewarded if this player then goes on to a state team, because I think you can claim points, you know, if they've been with you within that 5-year period. So anyway, look, it's a really good point. I think we can sort of tidy that up so that we're, you know, if this is happening and we get this system working well, that clubs are rewarded no matter where their step is for moving up the ladder as such.
Tom, sorry, just quickly, that one's huge for me, because at Capalaba, like I feel like we've been stung by that big time. The 2 years I've been there, we've had almost like between 25 and 30 players go from Capalaba before it was MPL Development Academy, etc. And when we were QPL, we've lost, I think it's 28 players to MPL clubs, and we get no recognition for it, no audit points for it, nothing, and we just go into the next year struggling, you know? So yeah, I think that has to happen if this model is going to happen.
Do you think then that if, you know, like, let's just say, I don't know, I'm picking arbitrary numbers out, but those 28 players, if you were to get the equivalent of, you know, a gold ring fence club producing 3 raw players, would you be more likely to, you know, communicate to academy and gold ring fence clubs to pass them on and move them up the ladder as such?
Yeah, I'd say so. Or even if there was something like Tass was talking then, like if these academy teams have 4 shadow players and then 2 go from Capalaba to Lions as example, but then 2 of their shadow players come back to us, something like that. Even a system like that, just something where we don't develop and lose them and get nothing back, and it's not really monetary, it's more just players, like personnel.
Yeah. No, definitely. It's really good points. I've made some notes here and we'll pull that together. What I'm hoping is that off the back of this, maybe towards the end of the season, we can have another session like this, hopefully in person. That'd be good, so that we can make recommendations for how we work sort of next year. Mindful of time, so we'll sort of whiz on. I think, going back to Taz's points, there is certainly consequences. What do we want? It's not an answer for now, but it could be as harsh as damaging to audit reviews and scores. If a club is pinching players and doing things the wrong way that doesn't abide by what we set out as a code of conduct, are they damaged in their audit score? Are clubs willing to accept that? So it's just something to consider. And again, it's an emotive topic, and it's pretty painful to talk to. But I think we've got to go through the pain to get some good outcomes. Any ideas on that, or anyone want to chip in terms of consequences? Maybe just one to tell us.
Yeah, Tom, I wanted to highlight the transparency of the rules is critical. So, a few rules that everyone is well aware of it. And obviously, if they don't stick with the rules, there will be some consequences. But I think it's our responsibility that we agree on some really clear rule and transparent rules that we can all follow.
Yeah, definitely. And again, it's a work in progress. We don't need an answer tomorrow. It's something that we can build on, because there's no point in us coming up with a plan that we can't stick to. It's got to be thought out, and we've got to have a good sort of look at it. So lastly, just from myself, and then there's one last little bit, is obviously the working environment. We've all got to understand that, we can't plan for the individual actions of players and parents. And sometimes, like Sarah's mentioned, sometimes we're not across what players and parents do. They just go off and do what they want. Understand it won't prevent all issues. It's still going to happen, that players' movement. As TDs and football leaders, we need to set the standards in how we operate. And again, in the long term, losing individual players probably won't affect your program overall, the 1s and 2s. And losing players up the football ecosystem is really, part of the game and what we're doing. And probably we need to find a little bit more recognition in that across the board. So last little bit, probably won't ask us to go through it now, just mindful we've been on the clock for a while. But in terms of a code of conduct around trials and movement and players of coaches, I really hope that you could just do us a favour, send us some notes and some points about what you think, what would be some real basic, it doesn't have to be basic, it could be real detailed approaches to code of conduct in terms of player movement and of players and even coaches as well. Like I remember once we had an under-20s coach join us from another club, and that caused an issue as well. So sometimes the movement of coaches. Hold my hand up. In the TSB, we've had some sort of volunteer coaches come on board that have got their sort of C license, and there was a few wires crossed their end, and they're sort of leaving club to come and join us at TSB, and that caused friction. So maybe we can include the movement of coaches, because they're a really valuable resource to us as well. So I think that needs to be considered. So yeah, look, fantastic from my point of view. Some really good points. David, I don't know if you want to sort of add anything from your end, but yeah, just from my point of view, I'll summarise these notes today and get them back out. If you could come back with some code of conduct ideas, and then just general thoughts about that model of 7-day approach, the trickle down and trickle up of players, that would be really good.
Yeah, just one, as Tom mentioned, your input is very important to us, because it's based on what you want to do, that then we can act accordingly. So that's the whole reason for this meeting. So that's all. And thanks everyone for your time.
Thank you. See ya.
Thanks, guys.
Tom, stay online, please, because Jared will have a quick chat with Jared as well. Hey Tom, how are you?
Hi Jared, how are you?